The first time I die, nobody even bothers to check my pulse. They just step over me. I'm lying face down in the dirt of the dueling ring, blood pooling under my cheek, and the entire academy is laughing. Not gasping, not worried, laughing. Because the school's biggest joke just got exactly what he deserved. That's what they're thinking. I can hear it in the way their laughter doesn't even pause when I twitch. My name is Ronan Voss, and 3 seconds ago, I was still trying to stand up. Now, I can't feel my legs. And that's the moment my shadow opens its eyes. Not mine, his. I don't know it yet, but the thing stretched out beneath me on the packed dirt, the black shape everyone assumes is just a trick of the torchlight, has been alive this whole time, watching, waiting, and it just decided I'm worth saving. That's where this story actually starts. Not with the beating, with what happens after it. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the part where I was the biggest embarrassment in Direwood Academy's 300-year history. Direwood doesn't take just anyone. It's the kind of school where every first year gets tested for elemental affinity on day 1, and depending on what element wakes up inside you, your entire life gets decided in about 4 seconds. Fire affinity? You're a prodigy. Water? You're valuable. Even a weak wind affinity gets you a decent placement and a future. I got nothing. The orb they use for testing is supposed to glow whatever color matches your soul. Mine didn't glow at all. It just sat there in my palm, gray and dead, while 300 students watched and waited for something to happen. Nothing did. The examiner actually laughed, out loud, in front of everyone. Null Affinity, he said, like it was the punchline to a joke he'd been saving all year. Well, that's a first. They gave me a nickname that day, and it stuck for 4 years. The Hollow One. Because apparently having no elemental power makes you less of a person and more of an empty space where a person should be. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being the weakest kid in a school built entirely around strength. It's not the insults that get you. You get numb to those fast. It's the way people stop seeing you as dangerous, which means they stop seeing you as worth respecting, which means eventually they stop seeing you as someone who can get hurt in ways that matter. Callum Ashgrave figured that out about me before I did. Callum is the golden heir of House Ashgrave, one of the 4 noble bloodlines that basically run this kingdom from behind the throne. Fire affinity so strong, the instructors stopped grading him on a curve. Good-looking in that punchable, aristocratic way. And from day 1, I was his favorite hobby. Not his rival, his hobby. Rivals get respect. Hobbies get whatever he feels like giving them that day. For 4 years, that meant public humiliation on a schedule. Tripping me in the hallway so hard my books scattered across 3 classrooms. Accidentally setting fire to my only uniform the week before exams. Making sure everyone at Direwood knew my scholarship only existed because some pity fund felt sorry for an orphan with no family name and no future. I took it, because fighting back against a fire affinity noble with an army of loyal followers when you have 0 elemental power isn't bravery. It's just a longer, more creative way to die. But 4 years of taking it builds something up inside a person. Something quiet, something patient. I didn't know what that something was yet. I was about to find out, in the worst possible way. The graduation dueling exhibition is the one event every noble family in the capital shows up for. It's not really about testing students anymore, not by year 4. It's a performance, a chance for families to show off their bloodlines in front of the people who matter. Everyone gets paired against someone at their own skill level. Everyone except me. Somehow, through a scheduling coincidence that wasn't a coincidence at all, I got paired against Callum. The instructors knew what that meant. The other students knew what that meant. I knew what that meant. It meant a public execution with a fancy name attached to it, in front of half the capital's nobility, and nobody was going to stop it. Because stopping it would mean admitting the system that let it happen was broken. I actually laughed when I saw the pairing board. Out loud. Alone. Because at some point 4 years of humiliation stops hurting and starts feeling almost funny, in a bitter, hollowed out kind of way. Guess this is it, I said to nobody. I had no idea how right I was, just not in the way I meant it. The exhibition ring is enormous, ringed with stone seating that goes up 3 stories, packed wall to wall with silk robes and gleaming house crests. I walked out into that ring wearing a patched uniform that had been mended so many times it barely counted as one uniform anymore, and the crowd's reaction was immediate. Laughter, whispers, a few outright groans of secondhand embarrassment, like they were personally offended that someone this pathetic was allowed to share a stage with House Ashgrave's heir. Callum walked out like he owned the sky itself, flame already curling lazily around his knuckles, not even bothering to look serious. Why would he? This wasn't a fight to him, it was a show. "Try not to cry too loud," he said, just loud enough for the front rows to hear and laugh at. "Actually, cry as loud as you want, gives the crowd their money's worth." I didn't answer him. I'd learned a long time ago that answering just gives him more material. The examiner raised his hand. The horn sounded, and the crowd leaned forward, hungry for exactly the kind of spectacle they'd come to see. Callum didn't even open with a real attack. He opened with a taunt, a small fire construct shaped like a laughing face that hovered in front of me and mockingly repeated my own nickname back at me. "Hollow one, hollow one." The crowd roared with laughter. That's when the first real fireball came. I didn't have anything to block with. No elemental shield, nothing but 2 arms and a body that had learned how to fall in a way that hurt less. I threw myself sideways. The heat of it seared past my shoulder close enough to blister skin through fabric. "Oh, he moves," Callum said, delighted. "Let's see how long that lasts." It didn't. The second fireball clipped my leg, and I went down hard, rolling through dirt that scraped every inch of exposed skin raw. The crowd's laughter got louder, not quieter, at the sight of me struggling to stand. I got up anyway. I always got up anyway. That was the one thing 4 years of this had actually taught me how to do well. "Still going?" Callum tilted his head, genuinely surprised, like a boy poking a beetle that refuses to stop twitching. "Fine. Let's finish the show properly." What happened next wasn't a duel anymore. Calling it a duel would be generous to the word. He hit me with everything, one attack after another, giving me no room to even attempt to close distance, no room to think, no room to do anything except absorb hit after hit while 300 nobles watched and cheered like I was entertainment instead of a person. By the time he finally stopped, I was on the ground, and I genuinely could not tell you how long I'd been there. The instructor should have called it. He didn't, because calling it early would have cut the show short, and nobody in that stadium actually wanted the show to end early. Callum walked over, casual, unbothered, and crouched down next to my broken, twitching body, like he was inspecting a piece of furniture he was deciding whether to keep. "You should thank me," he said, quiet enough that only I could hear it. "Nobody's going to remember the Hollow One existed after today. I'm doing you a favor, erasing an embarrassment." Then he stood up, turned to the crowd, and raised his arms for the applause that came roaring down like a wave. I lay there in the dirt, blood in my mouth, ribs screaming, vision narrowing at the edges, and for the first time in 4 years of taking every hit this school could throw at me, I felt something other than numbness. I felt rage, real rage, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that goes quiet and cold and looks for a way out. And that's when my shadow, stretched long and black across the dirt beneath the torchlight, twitched. Not from the wind, not from the flickering torches. It twitched on its own, like something inside it had just woken up after a very long sleep and didn't appreciate what it was seeing. Nobody else noticed. Why would they? Shadows aren't supposed to move on their own, so nobody's watching for it. But I was staring straight down into the dirt, half conscious, and I saw it happen. The black shape under my body pulled itself upright, peeling away from the ground like ink lifting off wet paper, taking a rough, human-like shape. And then it spoke. Not out loud, straight into my skull, a voice like something ancient dragging itself up from underwater. "You've been dying slowly for 4 years, it said. Would you like to stop?" I remember thinking, with the small, delirious part of my brain that was still functioning, that I had officially lost my mind from blood loss. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mouth wasn't working anymore. The shadow didn't seem to need an answer. Fine, it said. I'll take that as a yes. And the world went black. I woke up somewhere that shouldn't exist. No sky, no ground, not really. Just an endless gray expanse that seemed to stretch in every direction at once, lit by a light source I couldn't identify because there wasn't one. My body didn't hurt anymore. That was the first thing I noticed. No broken ribs, no blisters, no blood in my mouth. I looked down at my hands, and they were whole. "Where?" I started. "Inside your shadow," the voice answered, and this time I could actually see where it was coming from. The black shape from the dueling ring stood a few feet away, tall, featureless, human-like, but wrong in the way a reflection is wrong when the mirror's cracked. Or more accurately, inside a pocket of existence that lives attached to your shadow. Nobody's found it in a very long time. Nobody was meant to. "I'm hallucinating," I said. "I got hit in the head too many times." The shadow tilted what might have been its head. "If you'd like to believe that," it said, "you're welcome to wake up back in that dirt. Still broken, still bleeding, still losing. I won't stop you." That got my attention fast. "What are you?" I asked. "What is this?" "I don't have a name anymore," it said. "I did, once. A long time ago, before I was bound to a bloodline of Nulls and left waiting for one of them to finally survive long enough to be worth waking up for. You're the first in longer than you'd believe." "Bound to me how?" "Every so often," it said, "a soul is born with a body that can't hold elemental affinity because there's already something else living in the space where that affinity would sit. Something old. Something that got trapped there generations ago and has been sleeping through host after host, waiting for the right one. You've spent your whole life being told you're empty. You're not empty. You're occupied." I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified. I landed somewhere close to both. "Occupied by what?" "By me," it said simply. "And by the years of training I can give you, if you're willing to pay the price." There it was. Of course there was a price. There's always a price. "What price?" "Time moves differently in here," it said. "One day out there is 1 hour in here. No, reversed. 1 hour out there, roughly 100 hours in here. You can train inside this shadow realm while your physical body rests, and come out having lived weeks, months, years of training in a single night's sleep. Your body pays for it in exhaustion. Deep exhaustion, the kind that eats into you if you push too hard, too fast. But if you're careful, if you're patient, you can build a body strong enough that Callum Ashgrave's fire wouldn't leave a mark." I sat with that for a long moment. 100 hours for every hour. A single night's sleep could give me over 4 months of training. A week could give me years. "Why me?" I asked. "Why now?" The shadow was quiet for a second. "Because I needed to know you'd survive long enough to be worth the investment," it finally said. "Rage that goes cold instead of loud. That's rare. That's the kind that builds something instead of burning out. You had it tonight. Cold, calculated, and slightly insulting. Somehow that made it easier to believe." "Fine," I said. "Train me." "Then it's time you understood what you're agreeing to," it said, and the gray expanse around us shifted, twisted, and reformed into something that looked disturbingly like a training ground built entirely out of shadow and bone. This is where it stopped being a conversation and started being a nightmare. The shadow realm wasn't gentle. It was brutal in a way that made Callum's fireballs look like a warm greeting. Creatures made of solid black smoke with too many joints in their limbs came at me from every direction the moment training began, and the shadow, I started calling it Umbra, mostly because it never offered a better name, simply watched. "Get up," Umbra said the first time I went down. "That's the entire lesson today. Get up." I got up. I got knocked down again immediately. "Get up." This went on for what felt like hours, and according to Umbra's own math, actually was hours, dozens of them, compressed into a night's sleep back in the real world. By the time I woke up in my dormitory bed the next morning, drenched in sweat, muscles screaming in a way that made zero physical sense for someone who'd supposedly just slept 8 hours, I understood two things immediately. 1. This was real. My body was keeping score even if my mind wanted to call it a dream. 2. I was going to keep doing it, every single night, no matter how much it hurt. Because for the first time in 4 years, I had a way out. And it involved becoming something Callum Ashgrave couldn't hurt anymore. The next few weeks were a blur of two completely different lives running in parallel. By day, I was still the hollow one, still getting shoved into lockers, still watching Callum's little circle of followers laugh at the state of my patched-up uniform, which the healers had barely managed to repair after the exhibition duel. I played my part perfectly. Weak. Beaten. Broken. Exactly what everyone expected to see. By night, I was somewhere else entirely, getting torn apart by shadow beasts in an endless gray realm, getting back up, getting torn apart again, and slowly, agonizingly, getting stronger. Umbra didn't believe in easing me in. Every session started harder than the last one ended. When I finally managed to land a solid hit on one of the smoke creatures, actually staggering it instead of bouncing off, Umbra didn't celebrate. It just said, "Good, now do it faster," and threw 2 more creatures at me at once. "You're not training to be adequate," it told me once, while I lay gasping on the gray nothing ground. "You're training to survive things that should kill you outright. I need you to be something else entirely." "What else?" I managed to ask. "Invincible," Umbra said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Not fast, not clever, unbreakable. A body that survives long enough for everything else to catch up around it. I liked the sound of that a lot more than I probably should have. Weeks passed in the outside world, months passed in the shadow realm. My reflexes started changing first. Small things nobody else would notice, but I could feel in my bones. The way I started dodging Callum's casual shoves in the hallway a half-second before they landed. Then, the durability started. It happened first during a routine sparring class. A second year with a decent earth affinity misjudged his strength and clipped me with a stone construct meant to just push me back a few feet for a demonstration. It should have cracked a rib at minimum. Instead, I just staggered, blinked, and kept standing. The instructor actually paused the class. "Are you all right, Voss?" "Fine," I said, because saying anything else would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer yet. That night, back in the Shadow Realm, I told Umbra what happened. It made an approving sound, low and rasping. "Your body's catching up to the training," it said. "That's the first real threshold. It won't be the last. Keep going, and eventually, there will be very few things in this world that can put you down for good." "How far can this go?" I asked. "Realistically." "Realistically," Umbra said, "further than you can currently imagine. But imagination isn't the limiting factor here. Time is. Every night you sleep is another chunk of training. Every night you skip is training you'll never get back. So the real question isn't how far this can go. It's how badly you want it to." I wanted it badly. 4 years of humiliation had built up a very specific kind of hunger, and it was finally being fed. Something else started happening too. The other students began noticing small things. The way I stopped flinching when Callum's group walked past. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Callum uncomfortable, and Callum being uncomfortable was a brand new experience for him. "You've got a new attitude, Hollow One," he said one day in the courtyard, blocking my path with 2 of his usual followers flanking him. "Where's that coming from?" "Maybe I'm tired of being scared of you," I said, and immediately regretted how good it felt to say it out loud. The courtyard went quiet. Nobody talked back to Callum Ashgrave. Nobody. His followers looked at each other, waiting for the explosion. Callum just laughed, but it came out a little forced this time. "Careful," he said. "Confidence looks bad on someone who hasn't earned it." He didn't push it further that day, but I could see something behind his eyes, a flicker of a question he didn't like having to ask himself. What changed? He had no idea. Not yet. That was about to become a very big problem for him. There was one other person at Direwood who never treated me like the Hollow One, and her name was Wren Sable. Wren was the daughter of a merchant house, not noble blood by birth, which at Direwood meant she existed in a strange in-between space, tolerated for her family's wealth, but never fully accepted by the bloodline families who ran the social order. Maybe that's why she never joined in when people mocked me. She knew what it felt like to be looked at like you didn't belong. We weren't close, not in those first years, just two people who occasionally sat near each other in the back of a lecture hall because nobody else wanted to. But somewhere in that fourth year, something started to shift. "You're different lately," she said one afternoon, catching up to me outside the library. "You walk different. You look people in the eye now. What happened to you?" "Nothing happened," I lied, badly. She raised an eyebrow, unconvinced, but didn't push. "Well, whatever it is. I like it better than the version of you that used to apologize for existing." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing, and she just smiled and walked off like she hadn't just said something that stuck with me for the rest of the day. I didn't know it yet, but Wren was about to become a lot more important to this story than either of us expected, because House Ashgrave had plans for her that had absolutely nothing to do with what she wanted. The plan came out about 2 months after the exhibition duel, because Wren's father, drowning in debt from a series of bad trade deals, had quietly agreed to something without telling her first. An arranged marriage. To Callum. Not because Callum wanted her, he barely acknowledged her existence most days. But House Ashgrave wanted access to her family's shipping routes along the eastern coast, and marrying their heir into the family was the cleanest way to secure it. Wren found out from a servant's gossip before her father worked up the courage to tell her directly. She told me 2 days later, sitting on the library steps, staring at nothing, voice flat in a way that scared me more than if she'd been crying. "I'm being sold," she said, "dressed up nicely, but that's what this is." "Have you talked to your father?" "He won't even look at me right now. I think he's hoping if he avoids the conversation long enough, I'll just accept it." I felt that cold anger from the exhibition ring stirring again, except this time it wasn't about me. "You're not going to accept it," I said. It wasn't a question. "I don't have a choice," she said. "My family's debt doesn't disappear because I object to it." I didn't have an answer for that yet, but something in me, something that had spent months getting torn apart in a shadow realm and getting back up every single time, decided right then that I wasn't going to just watch this happen. That night, I told Umbra everything. "Interesting," Umbra said after I finished. "Ashgrave overreaches. Overreaching houses tend to have enemies who'd love an excuse to cut them down. But right now, you're still not strong enough to matter in a fight that involves a full noble house. So make me stronger, faster." "There is no faster," Umbra said. "There's only the pace you're already training at, and whether you're willing to push it right up to the edge of what your body can survive. The body I'm building for you isn't going to become invincible by accident. It's going to become invincible because every single night you choose to keep going after every reasonable person would have stopped." "Then let's stop being reasonable," I said. Umbra made that low, rasping sound again, the closest thing it had to approval. "Good answer," it said. "Then let's begin." What followed was the hardest stretch of training yet. Umbra stopped holding anything back. The shadow beasts got faster, meaner, hunting in coordinated packs instead of single opponents. More than once, I genuinely thought the pain was going to be permanent. It never was. My body was learning, night after night, exactly how to take damage that should end a person and simply refuse to end. Somewhere around what Umbra estimated to be 8 months of compressed training, folded into roughly 2 months of real-world sleep, something shifted permanently. I was sparring against 3 of the smoke creatures at once, and one of them landed a direct hit clean across my chest, the kind of hit that had put me flat on the ground 100 times before. I didn't go down. I looked down at my own chest, half expecting a hole where my ribs should be, and found nothing. No pain, no mark. Just the faintest lingering pressure, already fading. Umbra appeared beside me, watching with something that might have been satisfaction. "There it is," it said. "That's the first real taste of what I promised you. Keep pushing, and eventually there will be almost nothing in this realm, or the one you came from, capable of putting you down for good." I flexed my hand, staring at it like it belonged to someone else. "How much more?" I asked. "Much more," Umbra said. "This is the foundation. What comes next is the part where you stop being merely durable and start being something people write legends about. But legends take time, even compressed time. Patience. You've survived 4 years of humiliation for this. A little longer won't kill you." It nearly did, more than once. But I kept going. Back in the real world, the changes started becoming impossible to ignore. It started with small things people noticed, but couldn't explain. I stopped getting winded during conditioning drills that used to leave me gasping on the ground. A training strike from an upperclassman that should have bruised badly left nothing but a faint red mark that faded within minutes. Whispers started, quiet ones at first. "Something's off about the hollow one." Callum heard the whispers too, and Callum did not like them. He tested it directly, the way Callum tested everything, which is to say cruelly and in public. During a group training exercise meant to practice defensive maneuvers against elemental attacks, he accidentally aimed a fire blast directly at me instead of the practice dummy. Full strength, no warning. 6 months earlier, that blast would have put me in the infirmary for a week. This time, I just stood there and let it hit me. The flames wrapped around my forearm, and for one long, suspended second, the entire training yard went dead silent, waiting for me to scream, to fall, to do literally anything except what I actually did, which was lower my arm, look at the faint singe mark on my sleeve, and say nothing at all. Callum's face did something I'd genuinely never seen it do before. It went pale. "That's not possible," he said, quiet, almost to himself. "Guess I got lucky," I said, and walked away before he could recover enough to respond. I hadn't gotten lucky, I'd gotten trained, but letting him wonder felt a lot more satisfying than explaining anything. That night, Umbra was practically gleeful in whatever way a bodiless ancient shadow entity expresses glee. "You should have seen his face," I told it, replaying the moment. "I know," Umbra said. "I was watching through your eyes. Worth every bruise, wasn't it?" It was, but we both knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger problem, because a golden heir of House Ashgrave, publicly humiliated in front of his own followers by the boy he'd spent 4 years destroying, was not going to let that stand. Callum didn't do quiet embarrassment. He escalated. And the way he chose to escalate involved Ren. It happened 3 days later. Callum cornered Ren after her last class of the day, in a corridor mostly empty except for a few of his followers standing lookout, and made it very clear that her upcoming engagement to him meant she belonged to House Ashgrave now, whether she liked it or not. And that meant certain people, meaning me, needed to stop getting ideas about being close to her. She told me about it afterward, hands shaking with barely contained fury rather than fear, which honestly says a lot about who Ren was as a person. "He grabbed my wrist," she said. "Told me if he ever saw us talking again, he'd make sure your scholarship disappeared. Said the school owes his family too much money to say no to a request like that." That was the moment my patience, already stretched thin from years of accumulated grievance, finally snapped clean through. "He's not going to touch you again," I said. "Ronan, he's the heir of House Ashgrave. You can't just—" "I can't just what?" I said, and something in my voice must have carried more weight than usual, because she actually stopped mid-sentence and looked at me differently. Really looked, like she was seeing something new. "What happened to you?" she asked again, the same question from months ago, except this time, there was no easy way to deflect it. I told her. Not everything. Some of it even I didn't fully understand yet, but enough. The shadow, the training, the realm that existed in the space attached to my own darkness. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she didn't look at me like I was insane, which honestly surprised me more than anything else that had happened that entire year. "That explains a lot," she said finally. "The fire not hurting you, The way you stopped flinching. You believe me? I've watched you survive things that should have broken you for 4 years straight, she said. At this point, believing in a secret shadow realm is easier than believing you just got lucky. That was the moment something between us stopped being a quiet, unspoken thing and started being something real, something we both silently agreed to acknowledge without needing to say it out loud yet. There wasn't time for it to become anything more than that. Not yet, because Callum wasn't finished, and what he did next was about to force everything into the open in the worst possible way. He challenged me to a public duel. Not an academy-sanctioned one, with rules and instructors watching. A private one, off school grounds, in the old ruins outside the eastern wall. A place students were discouraged from visiting because of the monsters that occasionally wandered up from the deeper caverns beneath. The message he sent made his intentions clear enough. Meet me there tonight, alone, or I make sure Ren's engagement happens immediately, with no chance for her to say goodbye to anyone first. It was a trap. Callum wasn't the type to fight fair when he could arrange an ambush instead, and taking me somewhere with no instructors and no witnesses meant he could bring however many of his followers he wanted and call it self-defense afterward. I told Umbra everything, expecting it to tell me not to go. It didn't. Go, it said instead. It's a trap. You just heard everything I heard. I know, Umbra said, and you're going to walk into it anyway, because that's exactly what he expects. He thinks he knows what you are. He's about to find out he's wrong, in front of an audience that will make sure the whole capital hears about it by morning. How many of his followers do you think he'll bring? Enough that he feels safe, Umbra said. Not enough to matter. Are you ready? I thought about 4 years of laughter, 4 years of bruises that used to actually hurt, 4 years of watching someone treat cruelty like a hobby because nobody ever made him stop. I've been ready, I said. I just needed the body to catch up to it. Good, Umbra said. Then let's finish building it. Tonight, we go harder than we ever have. That night's training session in the Shadow Realm was unlike anything before it. Umbra pushed me past every limit I thought I had, throwing wave after wave of shadow beasts at me with no rest between them. I lost count of how many times I went down. I lost count of how many times I got back up. Somewhere in the middle of that brutal, endless night, something clicked into place that hadn't been there before. A threshold Umbra had been building toward this whole time. You feel that? Umbra said, as I stood in the gray nothing space, breathing hard, every inch of me aching in a way that somehow felt like strength settling into my bones instead of damage accumulating in them. Feel what? The body finally catching up to everything I've been building in it, Umbra said. Do you understand what that means? I flexed my hands, feeling something different in the way my own muscles responded. Faster, harder, steadier than they'd ever felt before, even compared to the improvements of the last few months. It means tomorrow night is going to be very different for Callum Ashgrave, I said. Umbra made that low, rasping sound again, deeply satisfied this time. Exactly, it said. Go get some rest. You're going to need every bit of what's coming. I woke up the next morning feeling like an entirely different person wearing the same face. The day passed in a strange kind of calm. I went to my classes. I ignored the whispers that followed me through the halls now, the ones speculating about what exactly had happened to the Hollow One over the past several months. I found Ren between classes and told her briefly what was happening that night. She wanted to come. I told her no, not because I didn't trust her, but because whatever happened in those ruins, I needed her somewhere safe when it did. Promise me you'll come back, she said. I promise, I said, and for the first time in years, I actually believed my own promise instead of just hoping it would hold. Night fell. I made my way out past the eastern wall, alone, toward the old ruins where broken stone columns rose out of overgrown grass, like the bones of something ancient that had died there long ago. Callum was already waiting, exactly as expected, and exactly as expected, he wasn't alone. 6 of his followers stood scattered around the ruined courtyard, torches lit, faces smug with the confidence of people who'd already decided how this night was going to end. You actually came, Callum said, genuine surprise in his voice. I honestly wasn't sure you would. You threatened Ren, I said. Of course I came. Noble, he said, in a tone that made the word sound like an insult. Foolish, but noble. You do know there's 6 of them and 1 of me, right? Even with whatever new trick you've picked up recently, this isn't a fight you win. We'll see, I said. Callum's smile faltered just slightly, a flicker of the uncertainty that had been growing in him ever since the fire blast that should have hurt me and didn't. He didn't like uncertainty. Nobles like Callum built entire identities around never having to feel it. Enough talking, he said, flame igniting around both hands now, brighter and hotter than anything he'd shown me before. Let's see this new trick of yours up close. The fight that followed didn't last as long as either of us expected, though for very different reasons. His followers came first, 6 of them, coordinated in a way that made it clear this ambush had been planned in advance. Earth spikes erupted from the ground. Wind blades sliced through the air from 2 directions. A jet of water tried to knock me off balance right into Callum's flame range. 6 months earlier, any one of those attacks would have ended the fight instantly. I didn't even flinch. The earth spikes shattered against skin that had absorbed 100 nights of Shadow Beast claws without breaking. The wind blades left shallow lines that closed almost as fast as they opened. I kept moving forward, straight through the coordinated assault, toward followers who'd stopped attacking entirely because none of their combined effort had done what months of planning promised them it would. That's not possible, one of them stammered, backing away. Get out of my way, I said, and something in my voice carried enough weight that all 6 of them scattered without needing to be told twice, which left just Callum. What are you? He said, and for the first time in this entire story, his voice actually shook. Someone you should have left alone, I said. He threw everything he had at me after that. Blast after blast. No restraint. Just raw panic dressed up as aggression. I walked through every single one of them. By the time I reached him, close enough to see fear replacing the arrogance that had lived in his eyes for as long as I'd known him, he wasn't attacking anymore. He was just standing there, frozen. I didn't hit him. That surprised him more than anything else that night. You're not worth the effort, I said instead, but you're going to listen carefully. Ren's engagement is off. Tell your father the trade deal fell through, or House Ashgrave's little scheme becomes very public, along with tonight's ambush. Not if you understand. He nodded, fast, desperate. Good, I said, and walked away, leaving him alone in the ruins with the wreckage of an ambush that had utterly failed. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't, because Callum Ashgrave wasn't the biggest problem I was about to face. He was just the first one. Word of what happened in those ruins spread fast, the way it always does when 6 witnesses can't keep their mouths shut, and by the following week, the entire capital had heard some version of the story. Most of them didn't believe it. A few did, and one particular version of the story reached someone I never expected to be listening. A letter arrived at the academy 3 days later, sealed with a crest I didn't recognize, addressed directly to me by name, not the hollow one, my actual name. Inside was a single line. Null Affinity students who develop unexplained invincibility have a way of attracting very specific kinds of attention. We'd like to meet. Come alone. Tell no one. There was no signature, just the crest pressed into black wax, shaped like an eye wrapped in shadow. That night, I showed it to Umbra. Umbra went very quiet for a long moment, and quiet was not something Umbra did often. That crest, it finally said, belongs to an organization I hoped you wouldn't have to deal with for years yet. What organization? People who've spent centuries hunting others like me, it said. Entities bound to hosts, shadowborn power. They don't want you exactly. They want what's living inside you. And they have a very long, very ugly history of getting what they want. I felt that cold weight settle back into my chest. The same feeling from the exhibition ring, except sharper this time, because this wasn't Callum Ashgrave and his fireballs anymore. This was something bigger, something that had apparently been waiting in the shadows of this world a lot longer than I'd been alive. So what do we do? Umbra was quiet again, and when it finally spoke, there was something in its voice I hadn't heard before. something that almost sounded like worry. "We get you stronger," it said, "faster than I planned. Because if they've already found you this early, it means the invincible body I've been building isn't just going to be useful, it's going to be necessary. For both of us." I looked at the crest again, that shadow-wrapped eye pressed into black wax, and felt something settle in my chest that wasn't fear exactly. It was closer to recognition, like some part of me had known, ever since that shadow first opened its eyes beneath me in the dueling ring, that beating Callum Ashgrave was never going to be the real story. It was just where the real story started. "Then let's not waste any more nights," I said. "Good," Umbra said, "because tomorrow, everything changes." I didn't sleep that night so much as I disappeared into it. The moment my eyes closed, the gray expanse of the Shadow Realm swallowed me whole, and Umbra was already waiting, already restructuring the training ground into something harder, sharper, less forgiving than anything I'd faced before. "We don't have the luxury of slow progress anymore," it said, as the first wave of shadow beasts began circling. "Whoever sent that letter has been watching you for longer than one duel in some ruins, which means the next version of you needs to be something they can't predict." "How do I become unpredictable?" I asked, already falling into a defensive stance out of pure instinct. "By stopping being merely durable," Umbra said, "and starting to hit back like it matters." That single sentence changed the entire shape of my training. Up until that point, almost everything Umbra had built in me was defensive. That had been enough to survive Callum, but surviving an organization that had apparently been hunting shadowbound hosts for centuries was going to require the ability to end a fight before it dragged on long enough for reinforcements to matter. The shadow beasts came at me differently that night, faster, meaner, built less like wild animals and more like trained soldiers testing a recruit's readiness for something bigger. I got thrown around plenty, but somewhere in the chaos of it, my hits started landing harder, actually staggering the creatures instead of just bouncing off them. "Good," Umbra said, watching one of the beasts stumble from a blow I threw without even fully committing my weight behind it. Durability was never the finish line, it was the foundation. By the time I woke up the next morning, drenched in sweat, something in my body felt fundamentally different. Not just tougher, sharper. Like every nerve had been recalibrated to react half a second faster than it used to. I tested it during morning drills, almost without meaning to. An instructor moved to correct my stance and I caught his wrist before he even finished reaching for me. A reflex so fast it startled both of us. "Apologies," I said, releasing him immediately. He just looked at me for a long moment, the way people had started looking at me more often lately, like they were trying to solve a puzzle that had changed shape overnight. Word about the ruins had already spread through the school. Some students avoided me now, out of caution instead of contempt. Callum's circle of followers scattered whenever I walked past. Callum himself I barely saw that week. Rumors said House Ashgrave was furious about the collapsed trade deal, and that Callum was taking the blame personally. I didn't feel sorry for him. 4 years of bruises don't exactly build sympathy. Ren found me between classes 2 days later, relief written all over her face in a way that made something in my chest loosen for the first time in what felt like weeks. "It's really off," she said. "My father got a formal letter yesterday. House Ashgrave withdrew the arrangement completely. He wouldn't tell me why, but I have a pretty good guess." "How's your father taking it? The debt's still there." "Angry mostly," she admitted. "Not at me. At himself, I think, for agreeing to it in the first place. But at least now, it's his problem to solve honestly, instead of solving it by handing me over to people who never once asked what I wanted." "I'm glad," I said, and meant it more than I'd meant almost anything in years. She studied me for a moment, the way she'd started doing more often lately, like she was constantly recalculating who exactly she was looking at. "You're different again," she said. "Even from a week ago. What happened out there?" I hesitated. Telling her about the Shadow Realm had already changed everything between us once. Telling her about the letter, the crest, the organization apparently hunting people like me felt like a much heavier thing to hand someone I cared about. "It's complicated," I said instead. "I promise I'll tell you, just not yet. Not until I understand it better myself." She didn't push, which was one of the things I liked most about her. She just nodded, trusting me with the gap in the story the same way she'd trusted me with everything else so far. That trust was about to get tested sooner than either of us expected. The letter with the shadow-wrapped eye crest hadn't been a one-time message. 3 more arrived over the following 2 weeks, each a little less polite than the last. The 4th letter didn't ask for a meeting. It informed me one was already arranged, at a specific location on the edge of the capital's old merchant district, whether I liked it or not. And it included one line that made the whole thing impossible to brush aside. We know about the merchant's daughter, too. It would be a shame if our next conversation had to happen through her instead of you. I showed the letter to Umbra that night with my hands actually shaking, something that hadn't happened in months. "They're threatening Ren now," I said. "Not asking. Threatening." Umbra's response was immediate, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Then we stop treating this like training and start treating it like preparation for war," it said. "They want to see how far you'll go to protect what matters to you, because that tells them exactly how dangerous you'll become once properly provoked." "So what do I do?" "You go to the meeting," Umbra said, "alone, like they asked. But you go as something they're not prepared for. Right now, they think they're dealing with a frightened boy who discovered some unusual durability. They have no idea what's actually been happening in the space attached to your shadow." "How do I make sure it stays that way?" "By making sure the next version of you they meet doesn't look anything like the one they've been watching from a distance," Umbra said. "Tonight, we push harder than we ever have." What followed was the most brutal stretch of training since this nightmare began. Umbra abandoned every remaining restraint, throwing beast after beast at me in combinations designed to force actual growth in real time. I took hits that would have ended a normal person a dozen times over. I dealt hits that started destroying the shadow creatures outright instead of just staggering them. Somewhere deep into that endless night, something shifted, bigger than anything before it. A pressure that had been building under my skin for months finally broke loose, spreading through my chest, my arms, my legs, like something long dormant had decided to fully wake up. Umbra went very still, watching it happen. "There it is," it said, quiet, almost reverent. "That's not durability catching up anymore. That's the body starting to hold real power. Earned, not borrowed." I looked down at my own hands, feeling something humming beneath the skin that hadn't been there an hour earlier. "What does that mean for tomorrow night?" "It means," Umbra said, "whoever's waiting for you is about to badly misjudge exactly what they're dealing with." I woke up the next morning feeling like a weapon that had finally finished being forged. The day passed in tense, deliberate quiet. I told Ren, carefully, that something dangerous was happening, that I needed her to stay somewhere safe that night, and not to ask too many questions yet. She didn't like it. She agreed anyway because by that point, she trusted me enough to know I wouldn't ask if it didn't matter. Night fell. I made my way to the address on the 4th letter, alone, through the narrow, winding streets of the old merchant district, until they gave way to a quiet courtyard behind an abandoned warehouse, lit by a scattering of lanterns casting long, twisting shadows across cracked stone. A figure was already waiting, cloaked, face obscured, standing with the kind of stillness that only comes from someone who's spent a lot of time being dangerous and doesn't feel the need to prove it. "You actually came alone," the figure said, voice smooth, unreadable. "Good. That tells me you're smarter than most hosts we've had to track down." "You threatened someone I care about," I said. "That wasn't smart. That was necessary." "Fair," the figure said. "The entity bound to you has been asleep for generations, waiting for a host worth waking up for. We've been tracking bloodlines like yours for a long time, looking for exactly this." "What do you want?" "Cooperation," the figure said, "or extraction. Either works for us. Cooperation is significantly less painful for you." Something in Umbra's presence stirred sharply at the back of my mind, sharp enough that I felt it like a physical jolt. "They don't know yet," it said, quiet and urgent, only for me to hear. "They don't know how far along you already are. Show them." I didn't answer the figure with words. I let the shadows pooling around my feet rise, curling up around my forearms in a way that made the cloaked figure go very still. "That's not possible," they said, voice losing its smoothness. "Not this early." "Guess your information's outdated," I said. The figure took a step back, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I watched someone who thought they held all the power realize, in real time, that they'd badly underestimated exactly what they were dealing with. "This isn't over," they said, retreating into the shadows of the courtyard. "You should have cooperated while cooperation was still on the table." "Then stop sending threats, and maybe I would have considered it," I said. They were gone before I finished the sentence, leaving me alone in that lantern-lit courtyard with my heart hammering and the shadows still curling faintly around my arms, unwilling to settle back down. That should have felt like a victory. It didn't, not entirely. Umbra's presence had gone quiet again, that same heavy, careful quiet from before, and I already knew what that meant. "They're not done," I said out loud, to nobody but the empty courtyard. "No," Umbra agreed. "That was a warning shot. They know what you're becoming now. And soon enough, so will a lot of people who'd very much like to control it instead of losing it." Callum Ashgrave had been the first problem. He'd turned out to be the smallest one. Whatever was coming next wasn't going to happen in a dueling ring in front of a crowd that laughed at bruises. It was going to happen in the dark, against people who didn't threaten for show, and who now knew exactly how much was at stake in getting what they wanted before I finished becoming something they couldn't take from me at all. "Then let's not slow down," I said, mostly to Umbra, mostly to myself. "We won't," Umbra said, "because what you just showed them tonight wasn't even close to finished. It was only the beginning of what's still asleep inside you. And somewhere in the dark beyond that courtyard, I could have sworn I heard something else answer back, something that didn't belong to Umbra at all.